Hi, new friends. Hi, Stacy. How are you? Lisa, I've been looking at we're talking about our members. 20 days. You did? That's so cool. Message me. I have a podcast. Find me.
Icebreaker. Yeah, right.
Thank you. I was I think October 27th will be Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to Zibby's Bookshop tonight for our event. We're so excited to have the newest Zibby book author, Patty Lin, here with her memoir and credits. And she will be in conversation with Thea Glassman, who wrote Freaks, Fleeks, and Dawson's Creek, and is a celebrated reporter herself.
I'm so happy to be here. I emailed Patty after I read her book and I was like, I cried, I internally screamed into a pillow, I felt the full gamut of emotions. It's incredible. If I could take you back to the very beginning, I'd love to know the TV shows that really shaped you as a child and as you grew up.
The Brady Bunch. I talk about it in like the first page of my book about how we watched, me and my brother watched so much Brady Bunch that I knew from the first few frames of the show what episode it was going to be. Just like before, like the dialogue even started. So we watched a lot of Brady Bunch, just all of the sort of afternoon reruns, like the Monkeys and Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, like all that stuff. And then there was the weekend stuff, like the Saturday night stuff, which was Muppet Show, Love Boat, Fantasy Island, all the Aaron Spelling stuff. So that was growing up, that's what I loved. That's what I was steeped in. And then later on, when I got a little older, in the mid to late 80s, I started watching stuff like Moonlighting, which was at the time like really groundbreaking. They would break the fourth wall. They would talk to the camera. They would do period piece episodes and stuff like that. So that was really exciting. And then and 30 Something was my favorite show, and it was so weird because I was teenager, but I just connected so much with these 30-something people. But it was just because the stories were just so intimate, and they would do stories that were not of your typical TV show plot. They would do a whole episode about going on a date night with your husband, and you know what I mean? Like, it was just, to me, that was really great that they could just take these small moments in life and make a whole episode out of that. And then they would also do really groundbreaking stuff like Moonlighting would do, where they would just do dream sequences and things like that. Or they had an episode that was sort of like a Rashomon, where they told the same story from like 4 different points of view. I mean, it was just so cool.
And it's interesting looking at you as a creative writer as a teen, because you were really diving into some interesting, deep stuff. Can you take us through a little bit of what your writing process was like as a teenager and how you kind of channeled your emotions into your own stories?
Well, when I was a preteen, I wrote fan fiction about Boy George. I feel like I should be looking this way. There are all these people over here who are looking at the back of my head. Can I turn? Or? Okay. Should we?
You just come this way a little bit, like steering a little bit.
Yeah.
It's so great to hear.
Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
There's a vibe.
Yeah, you can do one there, and a little bit one more.
It's right there.
Oh, was there a live stream?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll slide it over. That makes sense for everybody.
Yeah,
That's a great
I'm
idea.
producing this episode right
Thanks.
Is that better? Now you can't see. Now you're looking at the back of my head.
You can't, please.
Okay, so where were we?
Yes. Oh, yes. We were talking about Boy George.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, we, my family and I moved to New Jersey when I was 11, and it was a really tough time. I was going through puberty. I didn't know anybody in the new town. It was a culture shock because I was coming from the Midwest, and then and then everybody was just dressed different and talked differently in New Jersey. And so I was just really lonely. And so I turned to writing as a way of just kind of escaping that loneliness. And I had always, ever since I was like in third grade, I was really into creative writing. But it was that time of my life when I was writing that Boy George fan fiction, that I think that's what solidified writing for me as a way of coping with life.
And on the topic of coping with life, we fast forward many years later where you're sitting down and you're writing this memoir. And I'm curious, what were the moments or the chapters of your life that felt the most cathartic and like it poured out of you to get down? And what were the moments that you struggled a little bit more from your past to write about?
I think a lot of it was a struggle. A lot, because I was writing about really painful experiences in my career that were traumatic and that I had a lot of shame around, so I think all of it was hard. It wasn't until probably very late in the process when I was writing some later drafts, and then my editor and my publisher, they really pushed me to add more of my personal life into the book, especially my personal life after I quit TV. Because originally, the book ended when I quit TV. It was like, I quit, the end. And then, my editor was like, we need to see what your life was like after you left TV. Because you're so much happier now, and you have this whole, you have this full life, and we need to know that. So that's when I started writing about, the 10 years after I quit, and my wonderful life with my husband over here, and that part is the part that just flowed.
That's so interesting. And then going through, just as a reader, when I was reading these stories, my head was exploding. You tell a story, I'm not going to tell it as well, just condensed, was your first job was on martial law, and your boss had you go into a room with another writer and critique his script in front of him
On your
first day,
Yeah.
to humiliate that writer and sort of see what you were made of in the process. When you're looking back on those moments, how does it feel, and sort of what was it like to reprocess these moments of your career on the page?
It was really cathartic, and it kind of started even before I started writing, because when I had this party once, and there was a guy there who was like an aspiring screenwriter, and we were talking at the party, and we just got on the topic. He was asking me about my first job and stuff like that, and I started talking about that incident, and his eyes were like saucers. He couldn't believe it, but he was also really fascinated by it, and that was the first moment that I thought, these are maybe stories that people might want to hear. And then I started writing about it, and as I did that, it was very cathartic to sort of get it out of me, out there. That's kind of what the whole process was for me. It was just like kind of purging all that stuff.
And you go into Freaks and Geeks, which the way that I sort of saw it was this was the most healthy writer's room environment that it looked like you, and something you were genuinely proud of. It was a show you were proud of. When you look back on that time, what do you feel like are the biggest lessons you learned about writing from working on Freaks and Geeks?
Just that, like, you know, the collaborative process there was amazing. Judd Apatow, who was my boss, he was the showrunner, and Paul Feig, who was also a showrunner and the creator of the show. They created a writer's room where everybody felt comfortable sharing their ideas, and believe it or not, that is not common. You know, it's really not common in the business, and so that was an amazing experience to have everyone's ideas, you know, celebrated and welcomed, and what resulted from that was a lot of creativity, you know. And I think that, you know, if you create a nurturing environment where everyone feels safe, you're going to get great ideas. You're going to get great product.
And so actually, so the first time I interviewed Patty, we talked about Freaks and Geeks, and one of my favorite little nuggets you told me was, if you all are fans of Freaks and Geeks, you remember a character named Cindy, and you talked about how her poetry that she reads was inspired by you as a teen and the poetry that you read, and there was a whole exercise where you talked about your high school experiences, and what was it like kind of sitting in a group with a group of strangers at the time, talking about your most embarrassing high school experiences and using it as fodder for content?
It was weird at first, you know. I thought, well, I can't talk about this stuff in front of these people I just met. But Paul and Judd had given us all a questionnaire before we even started work. And the questionnaire had stuff like, what's your most embarrassing high school memory? When was the first time you had sex? I mean, it was just, you know, it was very intimate kind of questions. And so we all did our homework, we filled out the questionnaire, and then the first day we just started diving in and talking about all this stuff. And so that just kind of opened up everyone to be really honest and vulnerable in the room. You know, and there, you know, a couple of times people would make jokes about something that happened, you know, that from the questionnaire, and that wasn't great.
Yeah.
But overall, I think the atmosphere was very much like, we're all naked here. We're all showing our most vulnerable selves. So so that's how you get people to be able to create great stuff, you know.
Is there an episode you're particularly proud of from Freaks and Geeks?
The fart one.
Yes. So Patty, again, Freaks and Geeks, this is a iconic moment where Cindy cuts the cheese, and Patty wrote it, and
Well, I co-wrote it with
you
Paul.
co-wrote it with Paul.
Yeah.
Tell us about the writing of the fart moment, please.
And so it started with I wanted to do an episode about Cindy, the cheerleader, not being perfect, you know, because Sam, he's the lead geek in the show. He has this crush on the cheerleader, and she's so perky and pretty and all this. And I thought, well, let's see this other side of her, where she, you know, has a little bit of a mustache and she eats junk food and stuff like that. And so I was pitching this, and Judd Apatow said, "How about if she farts?" and I just was like, no, I thought he was joking, right? I mean, this is a show on NBC in 1999. Shows did not do that, and so I really thought he was joking, and so I would move, you know, just change the topic, and then he would come back to it. No, what about the fart? And I realized he was serious, and so he said, yeah, go write it. And that was the greatest week of my life. You know, I mean, he said his idea was, what what if she farts and she blames the noise on the chair? And then Bill, the other geek, has to tries to figure out if the chair really does make that noise or if she really farted. And so he like does this. And so that was I was like, okay, that's a scene I could write. And that was just so fun. And then the shooting of that was also amazing. It was probably my favorite day on a set ever. Was when we shot the fart scene because when Martin Starr, who played Bill, was like doing the thing where he's trying to make the noise on the chair. Paul Feig and I were behind the monitors watching, and we were laughing so hard we were falling out of our chairs. I ruined a bunch of takes because I laughed really loud, and I had to slap my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing. It was just so funny.
You go stupid chair.
Yeah.
It was interesting because you start to decide maybe this is not the industry for me. You looked back on Freaks and Geeks, and in a way, you had a lot of fond memories, but you also kind of reprocessed it in a new way.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that when you look back on Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah. It wasn't perfect. I mean, I think in terms of the writer's room and the process of writing the scripts, creating the scripts, that was pretty great. But then there were things like, being on a set there and having a director treat me not so respectfully, and getting yelled at, by directors, and also the fact that the network was always threatening to cancel the show and moving it all over the schedule because they didn't think our ratings were good enough. And that just caused a lot of stress throughout the whole job. And so, I looked back on that many years later and I thought, I don't know if it was that perfect, because that job was my second TV writing job. It was very early on in my career. And afterwards I kept trying to get back to that, and I kept thinking like, if okay, these jobs are horrible, but maybe I'll have another one like Freaks and Geeks again, and then it just never happened. So in a way, having had that experience kind of kept me in the business probably longer than I would have been otherwise.
So interesting, and you have like such a. If I'm getting this right, the next show you worked on was Friends, and Friends was Freaks and Geeks was a very character-driven show. Friends is a very joke-heavy show.
Yeah.
How did you deal with going to such a different type of writer's room and kind of having to be a joke machine and having to pitch a whole lot of jokes in public? What was that experience like for you?
It's really hard.
I can imagine, yeah.
I never intended to write for a comedy. I mean, I love comedy. I absolutely love comedy, but I just never thought of myself as a joke writer. And but the Friends people loved Freaks and Geeks. They were big fans of the show, and Freaks and Geeks did have some comedy in it, but it was different. The way that it was run was very different. So on a 1 hour drama, you don't sit in a room pitching jokes together, generally. But on a sitcom, that's kind of like all you do all the time. And the people who really thrive in that kind of environment, the sort of joke pitching environment, there are people who were, class clowns, and I just was never like that. Like I was shy, and, I could write a good joke, but I had to like sit and think about it for a while, And the big part of that is that when you are in a sitcom room, you can't, it's not just that you have to write a joke fast, you have to be able to pitch it well. You have to be able to perform it well. And I was not good at that. I had performance anxiety, and so I'd have a really great joke and then I'd pitch it and it would fall flat and then it wouldn't get in the script, So that was kind of painful.
Do you kind of gravitate towards the other introverts in the room? Like, do you all find each other in the writer's room?
A little bit, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Because is it almost a little bit divided between like the class clowns and the people who are maybe more interested in developing the characters?
Yeah. But I think in that situation, because it was such a joke-heavy show, everybody kind of had to be a joke machine, you know, like nobody was really that exempt from that requirement. But yes, there were some people who were a little less class clowny, and then there were the people that you knew were the go-to joke people.
And this is like, I had a visceral reaction when I read this. You talk about something called the huddle,
Yes.
which is on show nights. And if a joke was not landing, all the writers had to huddle in a corner and pitch alternate jokes. How did you get through that? Was there like a secret sauce to making it through the huddle and getting a joke in? What was that process like?
It was a lot of flop sweat. I mean, it was just, it was awful. It was awful. Because it's like, you know, imagine that process that you have in the writer's room of having to come up with jokes really fast, but like times a million, you know, in this like really high pressure situation. You got to do it really quick. The audience is sitting right there, the studio audience is sitting right there, and the actors are waiting for the new joke. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. And a lot of times I probably didn't even pitch anything. I think I was probably just standing on the sidelines.
Yeah, I find that very relatable. I would have done the exact same thing. And it's an interesting like timing, because you're in season 7, and you talk about how by the time a show gets to season 7, they're hurting for storylines.
Yeah.
What was that experience like to be in a writer's room when they had maybe used up a lot of stories? Yeah, they'd gone through a lot at that point.
It was a lot of sitting around in silence, you know, because you just run out of ideas. And also, you're sitting there for 12 hours a day without really that many breaks. And after a while, your mind just starts to shut down. So yeah, that was really tough. And I have this, you know, feeling that, and I know this is a controversial take, because some people think that, you know, oh, the good old days when shows had 22 episodes a season and would go for 10 years. I don't know if that's really the good old days, you know? Like, to me, I feel like a show has a natural lifespan, and after a certain point, like you're just jumping the shark constantly, right? You're like scraping to find good ideas, and I don't want to watch that. And certainly don't want to be the person trying to come up with the ideas.
Well, it almost makes me think with Freaks and Geeks, was it a blessing in a way that we got one perfect season and
Kind
that we didn't see them go to college and go through that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, especially with like teen shows, you don't want to see them go to college.
No.
Not that there aren't good college shows,
Sure, yes.
but
Felicity, yeah.
but that's sort of like, that was the concept of the show to begin with. It's not like they were kids and then they grew up, you know. It's really hard to make that transition. I think any show that goes past a couple of seasons is definitely, it's in a challenging position. And I happen to love a lot of really short runs. I think that the British kind of model of doing the short couple seasons, 10 episodes each, that's actually really good, I think, for just for keeping things fresh.
Right.
Yeah.
And you, going to Desperate Housewives, you were there from the ground up, from the very beginning with Desperate Housewives, and we sort of track the unique dysfunction in all of these different writers' rooms. And one thing that caught my eye with Desperate Housewives was that you weren't really allowed on set, that writers weren't really encouraged to go on set. How does that kind of shape the creative process, and like what was the story behind not really being able to be present during this time?
There were some shows that wanted the writers on set, and there were some shows that didn't, and it was kind of arbitrary. It really just depended on what the showrunner wanted. And also, if there were very few writers on the staff, you couldn't send writers to the set, because then there would be nobody to break stories in the writers' room. So it all depended on that, and also just kind of what the cast was like and whether they wanted, you know. But I think that, you know, having worked on a show like Freaks and Geeks, where we were invited to the set, we were actually required to go to produce our own episodes. I found that to be an amazing experience, despite the getting screamed at by a couple directors and stuff like that. Like, overall, I just felt like because we writers would get to go see our episodes being shot, we got to know what worked and what didn't work, and that would inform the writing. And we got to know the actors' real personalities, and that informed their characters. So I think that when you can do it, it can be a great experience, but everybody has to be up for it, you know?
Are there moments you can think of when you were on set and were watching and observing an actor that you kind of filed it away and incorporated it into their character as you were
Yeah.
writing?
Well, I mean, Seth Rogen was a perfect example of somebody who, you know, he had a really small part in the pilot. Nobody really knew what his character was. He was just kind of like quiet, snarky guy, you know. And then when the writing staff got to know him better, we realized that he was so funny. You know, his sense of humor really just changed the whole way that we wrote his character. You know, because then he wasn't just like the quiet, surly guy. He also had this like sweet side, and he was just super funny, and you know.
When you sort of watch their careers take off the way that they did, were you surprised? Did it make sense? when you
Totally
saw
made
it?
sense.
Yeah.
It totally made sense. Yeah, they were so talented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We go to Breaking Bad, which is the last show that you worked on. The sense that I got was it was a little bit of the straw that broke the camel's back was Breaking Bad. Can you tell us about your experience on Breaking Bad and maybe why that was your last bow when it came to TV writing?
Well, you know, I always say that it wasn't just one straw that broke it. It was so many experiences, very similar experiences over and over and over, and it had this cumulative effect. And then you just kind of get to the point where you've had enough, you know. But on Breaking Bad, you know, that was a situation where, you know, we had a showrunner who was very insular in his vision for the show, and wasn't able to really communicate that well to the other writers, and didn't really seem like he was very interested in communicating that. I hate to keep referring back to Freaks and Geeks, but I mean, on that show, they really trusted us to, you know, to learn from our mistakes, and so we would be given multiple drafts that we would be able to write. And then I didn't get any of that on Breaking Bad. You know, it was like I wrote one script, and my boss essentially just took it and rewrote the whole thing. You know, and that happened over and over and over in my career. It wasn't just on that one.
Right.
There just across the board, I found that there was a very this attitude towards the writer's work where it just none of it was sacrosanct. Like, you know, and I it's a collaborative medium. Like TV is a collaborative medium, and writing can always be improved by getting feedback and you know, doing multiple drafts and things like that. But you have to let the writer do that. Like you have to let the writer synthesize that, you know. And if you want to have a show that has collaboration, and if you want to, as a showrunner, if you want to ever be able to go home and have dinner and, you know,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like you need to delegate. You need to like figure out how you can train your writers to write the show the way you want it. And I just did not have that experience on that show.
What I imagine is going from being a TV writer to becoming a memoirist. You can be in your own space. You can write your own story. You're not basing your dialogue off of a showrunner's voice. What was the experience like of sitting down to tell your own story? What was it like getting back into writing again? Did you have any of the same feelings you had in the past? Did you have new feelings? What was that experience like?
I had a lot of baggage. I mean, after I left television, my desire to write was almost completely gone. That's what the business did to my passion for writing, you know, and so it was very hard. I probably could have just. I mean, I think I hit this. I was at a fork in the road where it's like I can either just give up and never try writing again, and just say, okay, you know, I'm gonna put that behind me, or I'm gonna have to figure out a way to get past all of this trauma and baggage and try to enjoy writing again. And so I chose the second path, And I just you know, I had to do a lot of therapy to be honest,
Yeah.
a lot of therapy and a lot of practices with my writing where I would you know, I had such a strong internal critic in my head. I mean, and that was from birth basically, but it got a lot worse when I worked in TV because you're just facing so much rejection and you're constantly having your work rewritten and thrown out and all this stuff. And so I had to do a lot of work to get past all of that and get to a point where I could just write and not be, you know, constantly thinking, oh, this is terrible. Nobody wants to read this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Do you remember that moment when that happened for you?
Well, it wasn't like a single moment. It was a gradual process. But yes, I mean, eventually I did realize, you know, I'm actually kind of enjoying this again. You know, and it was a miracle.
It's something like you do such a beautiful job of creating characters within your story. Everybody has like such a distinct, everyone feels so three-dimensional. I was curious how you feel like, if at all, your career as a TV writer might have shaped you as a memoirist.
My TV writing experience, the skills that I developed as a TV writer, those were different skills than the ones that I used for prose writing. And you know, when you write a script, you're writing a blueprint. You know, you're writing because you know that like a director's going to come in and production designer is going to come in and actors are going to come in and you don't paint the scene quite the same way that you do when you're writing a book. In fact, that's considered to be bad writing, bad script writing when you have like a lot of flowery description and stuff. So I had to retrain myself when I was writing my book because it was very sparse. The prose was flat, and I had to work on those muscles again of like creating sensory details and making sure that the writer or that the reader would feel like they were in the scene. And I still don't feel like I do it that well. I have to work really hard at it.
You do.
You're very kind.
And this is such like a specific writerly question, but I mean, you were telling stories from so many years ago. How did you recapture those like sensory details, like all those little details, the fantastic dialogue? Did you have a process for kind of getting that into your brain?
I just had to kind of relive it in a way, which was really hard. You know, I mean, my husband would always say, you know, like, oh, you know, he would always feel so bad for me that I was reliving these experiences, but that's kind of the only way you can do it if you want to remember these details. Because if you're not reliving it, then, I mean, unless you like took contemporaneous notes at the time, but even then, I mean, if you're processing it to, you know, put it in a book, you've got to go there emotionally, or it's just not going to resonate at all.
Are there certain stories that you just feel very glad to have out in the world in any way?
I would say all of it, you know? I mean, but I think especially the part about finding a life after the job, you know? Because I didn't think that was going to be interesting to people. You know, I thought like, oh, they're only going to be interested in the TV stuff, and then, you know, and then having my editor push me to do more, that made me realize that other part of it, it sort of like validated the post TV career part of my life in a way, because when I wrote about it, I was like, yeah, this is part of my story, you know. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And
Yeah.
do you feel like by now, like, does writing bring you joy now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to go back to your other question about like, you know, TV writing, kind of informing, when I was, you know, after I got a book deal and I was working with my editor to you know, finish the book or to, you know, get the final draft of it, there was a lot of rewriting that I had to do. And that was something that I was really good at from TV writing.
Yeah.
because you have to rewrite all the time. And so there would just be this moment where it was like, okay, I'm going to just roll up my sleeves and do this. And I found that I was able to do that, relatively easily because I had been trained that way,
And like, lastly, I'm curious what TV you love now, what TV you love to watch now. Do you watch TV in a different way than, like, does it bring back memories? Are you thinking about how the sausage was made when you're watching a TV show? Can you have some distance from it? What's that? What's your TV diet like?
I for a long time, I couldn't watch TV. Right after I quit, I couldn't do it. It was too painful because I would just get traumatized. I would have PTSD, and I don't use that term lightly. I mean, it really was like PTSD. I would have visceral reactions, where I would start sweating. So it took me a long time, but eventually I got to the point where I was able to start watching TV again and start enjoying it. And like now, I love it. I mean, I don't watch everything. There's just too much. But when I watch something that's really great, I really get into it. And of course, there's always a part of my brain that is thinking about how it's made. But when a show is great, I can let go of that part for a little bit to just kind of enjoy. But I'm always going to now come to it with a different lens. And a greater appreciation, quite frankly, for when a TV show is really great, because I know how hard it is to make that so good, So I love Beef. I keep telling everybody, Beef is like my favorite show of the last probably 10 years. It's a fantastic show on Netflix, and it was created by a Korean American man, and Ali Wong is starring in it, and Steven Yeun, and it's a majority Asian cast, and it's told from an Asian point of view that doesn't pander to a white audience. It doesn't try to explain its Asianness. It just is, but it tells these great stories that are universally relatable. It's just that it's told from the point of view of an Asian person, and a variety of Asian American backgrounds, not just one, and they're all very specific and they're all very real. And so, and it's like funny, and it's deep, and it's touching, and it's surprising, and I just love it so much. I've watched the entire series twice.
Wow.
And I'd probably watch it again too. But I love that. I love Succession. So funny. What else? Sweetie, what else do we watch? I'm blanking out.
The Americans was quite good, but it had that
No, see, this is the thing. This is the thing that I if a show has 9 great episodes and then there are 2 that aren't great, I'm like,
You're like,
I can't recommend it. I'm only going to recommend something that is perfect. Yeah,
and so Succession, Beef, perfect.
yeah, I would
That's
say
it?
so.
Okay.
What else? I know there are other ones. What?
Black Mirror.
Black Mirror is pretty amazing, especially this last season.
Haven't seen it yet.
Oh,
But yeah,
yeah,
no, it's okay, it's
spoilers.
okay, yeah.
You should watch it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Very relevant for our times.
Will we have our homework?
Thank
Yeah, thanks, Patty.
you. Should we do
Any
a
questions?
Q&A?
Yeah.
Q&A or?
What's the situation with hiring women and people of color to be writers in TV? Is it increasing, decreasing? What's the situation with that? And also, have there been times where you or some other writer have come up with a great idea, and then a guy comes in that writing group and kind of steals it and makes it his own and says he's the one that has come up with that idea? Steal it.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to my own experience. Like that never happened to me, where somebody just out and out tried to steal something. At least I don't remember that happening. And in terms of women and people of color, I think things are getting better. It's better than when I was in TV 15 years ago, but we're not there yet, and I think that it's just, I see a show like Beef, and I'm like, this is what you can get when you give talented people of color the freedom and the power to create great shows. I mean, I don't have the answers. I really don't. I wish, the problem is that the people who are in power are often not people of color, and so it's very hard for the situation to change.
I imagine Beef would not have been made 10 years ago, if
No.
that, yeah.
Yeah, no way.
Similar question on like the issue of wokeness, right? I think we all saw Sex and the City come back recently and stumble around wokeness, right? It felt like very heavy-handed and very difficult.
I didn't watch it.
Oh, smart of you. When I think about like the best woke show ever, it's Archie Bunker, right? That was like actually a time when someone got it and knew how to illustrate it in a way that was like, digestible. Do you see that going on, or has like the heavy-handedness of wokeness sort of taken that off the table?
I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I did watch the reboot. I'm struggling through it.
That's what I keep hearing. I keep hearing
Yeah.
people going, oh.
We keep trying for
Yeah,
some reason.
yeah.
I don't know why.
I heard it gets better at the end.
Yeah, it does. Yes,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it's just because. Well, I was about to say spoiler. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I feel like they were trying so hard to atone for their sins in some way, because Sex and the City was just so white.
It's really
so
outdated. Yeah.
so straight,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I almost feel like they tried so hard that it was a little cringy and almost kind of changed the characters from who they were in the original show. I think they're a little bit of ghosts of their past selves. That's how I feel about it, and just like that. Yep, we're still watching, so I don't know what.
Yeah. But I mean, when a show is, beloved, it creates a lot of goodwill, and then people will stick with it for a long time when they maybe shouldn't.
Well, it's because I feel like people always ask about a Freaks and Geeks reboot, and what are your thoughts on that? Or do you think that's a hard no? Yeah.
That's not gonna be good. I mean, I don't think it's ever gonna happen.
No, I think
Yeah.
the actors are like constantly asked it, and yeah.
I mean, do you really want to see that?
Not particularly.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't want to see
No.
that.
Well, first off, I actually have a friend that worked on Secession, so I'm gonna tell her that you loved it.
Oh, yeah.
My question is, so I'm currently literally just finished the first draft of my memoir. I'm going to be launching it in November, so that's super exciting. I would love to hear your perspective on how do you talk about issues in an industry, or in my case, talking about being from South Dakota, in a way that is helpful when you have so much resentment and it could come off as just judgment.
Mm-hmm. Can you be more specific about if you feel comfortable talking about it?
I love it. Why my memoir?
I need more specifics to, yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, so I'm from South Dakota. My book is a mental health memoir from trauma to healing. And I hold so much resentment for South Dakota and my family as well. But just going back to South Dakota, I hate it was 95% white when I was growing up. It's not more diverse, but I'm angry that there's so much unchecked privilege there. I'm angry that the people are not looking at how they impact the world. They think that their lack of money makes up for the fact that they don't cause harm. And I want to write about that in a way that isn't bad-mouthing them,
Mhm.
but I have judgment and I have resentment.
Yeah. I mean, if you have judgment and you have anger, there's nobody saying that you can't write from a place of judgment and anger. You know? I mean, I'm seriously, like, you should, I think that when you're writing a memoir, probably the most important thing, look at me talking about, like, I know what I'm talking about. It's my first book, and I'm like, this is how you write a memoir. This is what I found, is that honesty is really just, that's the only requirement, right? I mean, if you're trying so hard to make yourself not be angry, like, that's just not gonna work. You know, if you get to a place where you're genuinely not angry anymore, that's a different story. But if you have anger, you know, and you want to express it, go for it, right? That's what I would say.
I appreciate that. I know that I'm gonna go back to South Dakota and I'm gonna be like, hi, old high school, hi, old college. I'm gonna write this book and talk about why you suck sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're gonna have to deal with, like, you know, them, what they're gonna think of that. But I think that, you know, you can't talk yourself out of being angry. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not gonna happen. You know, so I think the most important thing when I read a memoir, I want to read a memoir that is written from an honest point of view. And that is, like, really that's like the basis for, I mean, I don't want to read a memoir that isn't written from an honest point of view.
So kind of to piggyback on that, when you talk about people in the industry, have you had any sort of pushback on your version? Because these people obviously are still alive, like the showrunner at Breaking Bad and so forth. Have you had any sort of criticism?
Have you been reading any of the press?
I haven't. No, actually, I haven't. So are you getting some of that? And how are you dealing with that?
There's some blowback, yeah. There's some blowback, but here's the thing. I wrote a story about my life and my life experiences, and specifically my life as a writer. And so I wrote about things that affected my life as a writer, you know, and that's just the story that I was telling. You know, I wasn't trying to be dishy or anything. Like, I included things that were relevant to that narrative, you know. And the other thing is that your sunglasses are really cute, by the way.
I can't see without them. I'm not trying to be cool.
I was like, wow,
You look blurry.
But the other thing is that, you know, when you're writing a memoir, you are, it's a subjective first person account, you know, so you're allowed to tell the story the way you see it, you know. And I worked really, really hard to write the story, not just honestly, but fairly, you know. I wanted to be fair and I wanted to be balanced. And I tried very hard to do that. And so you know, that's all you can do as a memoirist. You know, you get your life, you're writing about your life, but your life is going to include the people that were in your life at the time, right? You can't write a memoir just about yourself. There are people in your life, so you have to write about them too. So you just have to do it as honestly and I mean, as, you know, fairly and honestly as you can.
So do you read the press and respond, or you just don't
I'm
say?
trying not to.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying not to, because I really just I can't handle it.
So on that note, but back to the other note, I was just thinking about Breaking Bad, and I remember there was something that the writer was being harassed because the fans of the show didn't like the wife. Do you remember this? Does anybody remember this? That
Not
the
Skylar.
writers were being harassed.
It was
Really?
mainly because of the actress, Skylar, who played Skylar. Everyone was really being very negative and mean to her.
Really?
Yeah,
I
as
don't
the
remember.
seasons
Like,
went on.
threatening to the point that the writer, who was a woman, was scared. Like, now writers have to be concerned about feedback from masses of people being so angry at the characters doing something that they didn't want
insane.
to have done to them. So you weren't part of any of that?
No, I was only there for a few months in the very beginning. So I wasn't even aware of that. I wasn't privy to that. But yeah, that's insane, right? Like people are just trying to do their job, you know? Like, why are you getting harassed by, fans? It's just crazy to me.
Were you logging onto like television without pity and all those message boards to see feedback, or did you like keep distance from it? Yeah.
I mean, when you're writing for TV, you're not. I mean, if you get into a position where you're writing like to the specifications of the fans, that's not going to go well, And I'm not saying that you shouldn't consider feedback, but I don't know. I think when you let in too much, when you're trying to please all these people, you're just nothing authentic is gonna come from that, Any more questions?
I just want a question, the writer's strike, have you been involved,
I'm
anything?
no longer a member of the Writers Guild, because I haven't worked in TV for 15 years.
Okay.
But I did, I feel for the writers who are on strike right now, and it's very disappointing to me that after 15 years that things are still, bad enough that people have to go on strike. And of course, in the last 15 years, a lot has changed in the TV industry because now streaming has kind of upended everything. It's changed the whole business model. And in some ways, it's a lot harder for the writers now to make a living. And it's not just about money, but like that's a big part of it. So, I don't really feel qualified to talk about all the details of the strike, but I just really stand behind the writers, and I hope that this ends up changing the industry for the better, because there are companies out there who really only care about the bottom line, and if they could just cut the writer out of the whole thing and not pay them, they would do that in a heartbeat, and so this is why, workers have to, this is not just in Hollywood, but like workers, the labor movement everywhere is exploding because people are standing up for themselves and saying, no, we want to make a living. We want to, be able to pay our rent and live a decent lifestyle. These writers are not asking for, to get rich. They just want to be able to live.
Patty, so this is your first book. What's next? Do you have any ideas what your next book's going to be?
This is my friend Kat, everybody. It's so funny because when I get that question, my immediate reaction is like, I feel like I'm being grilled by an old, like a relative that's like, what are you doing now? No, what's next for me is I can't keep turning this way. I am speaking to you though. What's next for me is that I feel writing this book was such an amazing, transformative experience for me that I definitely want to write more. And I don't know if it's going to be another memoir, although at the moment I feel like I never want to write a memoir again, just because the promotion of it is hell. I mean, you're talking about your life on national television, like it's horrible.
It's a unique hell too. It's a unique hell to promote a memoir.
Yeah. But whatever the next thing is, whatever the next book is, I want it to be something that I felt like when I wrote this book, it was something that I just kind of knew I had to do. I had to tell the story if I was going to get on with my life. And so I want whatever the next book is, I want it to feel like that. Like it's a story that I just have to tell, that I'm compelled.
Does that include fiction?
It might. Yes.
Possibly controversial counterpoint to what you said about these writers just want to make a living, just want to work. But if
AI can do what they're doing. And even though I think it's gonna be, let me finish. If it just ends up being formulated crap, that, I'm gonna tell some credit, that just ends up on Hallmark or Lifetime Channel, so be it, it's formulated AI crap. So isn't this whole process with technology and improvement, isn't it just forcing people to rise to the top, which I think is great? You get better writers, you get actual original stuff, you actually get something creative, you actually get something like Beat or like Secession. But otherwise, it's kind of like, okay, maybe you guys should find alternate forms of making a living. I mean, nobody's owed.
No. I mean, absolutely, nobody is owed a living, right? And I also feel like, it's not that I feel like all technology is bad. I don't feel like jobs should be saved just for the sake of saving jobs. If a computer can do a job in a more efficient way, then we should probably, a better and more efficient way, then we should probably go do that, But I don't see a computer being able to write scripts as well as a human. And if they do, something like ChatGPT, the way that it works is that it takes information from what's already out there. And what's already out there was written by human beings. And so those people should give their consent for their material to be used this way, and they should be compensated for that. So that's really, I think, what the fight is about with AI, because there's talk of like, okay, one day there's just going to be AI creating first drafts, and then they're going to bring in a showrunner to do like a touch up on it. And it's like, well, first of all, I don't know if that's actually going to create anything great, but if they do that, the people who wrote the original scripts that the AI was based on should get paid. The same way that we get paid residuals when a rerun of our show airs. So that's kind of what the fight about AI is right now.
I think that is all the time we have for questions. I just want to thank everyone again for coming. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Thea. We still have wine and cheese plate, and Patty's husband has very graciously brought cake. So there will be cake. And we have email sign-up sheets at the bar and at the register. We're giving away a $25 gift card very soon. So if you haven't signed up yet, sign up now. And you guys again.